Hello again everyone, and welcome to my next video. Today I present to you the continuation of Rabbi Gestetner's series of refutations to the second Collive video of false rabbis, linked for you below, which was put out by Yosef Feigelstock and Kahan. They are the ones among the others who hurl the great calumny of Gett Abuse against Jewish men. In today's segment I am continuing where I left off in part 3, which you might want to watch in order to have a better understanding of what I will be discussing here. For those of you who are interested in understanding how we paskin or rule today in halacha related to divorce, then this is a video that you will not want to miss. But before I begin today's topic, I'd like to take a moment to inform you about a new feature that for the first time can be accessed under the playlist tab of this channel. The new playlist is called Get Informed, and it contains mostly instructional videos geared towards the novice and how to navigate the turbulent modern Jewish divorce process. Be on the lookout for additional how-to videos that I will be adding to the Get Informed playlist over time. Now, with that announcement out of the way, let us begin with part 4. As I said in the previous video, I have examined the first 3 out of 8 rationales that Rabbi Gestetner has outlined as part of his refutation number 5, which he used as proof to show that the statements made by Feigelstock are lies. That is to say, in the case of Moas lie, or he is repulsive to me, which by the way is the most prevalent complaint of women who initiate a modern Jewish divorce, Feigelstock's assertions are without any merit. Rabbi Gestetner explained how Feigelstock transformed Moas lie into a category where you can coerce a get from a man, when in reality most poskim have ruled that not only can cases of Moas lie not be coerced, but the halochos of Rabbeinu Tam also do not apply to them. The most important message emanating from these 8 rationales of Rabbi Gestetner is that the statements of the heretic rabbis such as Feigelstock and Kahan are false. They try to mislead the public into believing that although we cannot overtly coerce a man to give a get, we can still apply our halacha de Rabbeinu Tam to him. As you will see, Feigelstock and Kahan actually say a double lie here because A, according to true halacha, halachos are not allowed to be used in cases of Moas lie, and B, the sanctions that these rabbis use, such as shaming a man in public, are not in line with the actual halacha rules of our halachos, but instead are actually considered straight-up coercion. Rabbi Gestetner not only taught us the correct halacha, but also cited for us the exact poskim, chapter and verse, to back up his refutations. By doing so, he turned over the stone, so to speak, allowing the rays of the Torah to shine over the rotten, stinking distortions of halacha propagated by the false rabbis. And let it be known that whenever Rabbi Gestetner refers to a posik or poskim, he's referring to the authentic rabbinic sages, the ones accepted by all rabbinical scholars and students who have handed down their halachic rulings in matters of divorce up until the time of the Chazon Ish. It goes without saying then that no one has the right to question, let alone modify in any way the halachic rulings of the great sages that have preceded them. In this video, I will be analyzing for you the remainder of Rabbi Gestetner's 8 rationales. I begin now with rationale number 4. But before I do, I will replay for you the damning video segment that demonstrates Feigelstock's egregious distortions of halacha in matters of Moas lie.
So the Rambam goes on top of that in Eishes Perikut Dalet, and he says a woman that doesn't want to sleep with her husband, and you ask her why doesn't she want with her husband? She says ma'astihu. She says I can't stand him. It's a very interesting thing. The also the Lashon HaShulchan says Moas lie. He is, I can't stand him. He is foul. He's repulsive. That means there's a mitzvah not to hate. You're not allowed to say to another Jew, I hate you. It might happen in reality, but it's a loisese, loisisna achicha belvavcha. So here we're talking about she doesn't hate him, but she says, I can't stand you. It's just like you had a fig fall on the floor and exploded on the floor and say nothing happened to it. You can eat it. But you can't tolerate that. And that's what she's saying. She can't tolerate this man. And that's the definition of the Shulchan Aruch. So the Rambam says in this case, where she says, Ma'astil, I can't tolerate this man, and I can't sleep with him. Yeah, we force him to give a get, because our women are not captured to be with the man they don't want against their will. And that's the Rambam Paskin. If a man or a woman, it will be in both cases, if they would say, I can't stand this relation, I cannot sleep with this person with my will, the marriage is over. And a get could be forced. Comes the Rosh, and the Rosh says, and this is the halacha in Shulchan Aruch, that a get cannot be forced in such a case. So the argument of the Rambam that our girls are not forced into a marriage against their will is a very strong argument of the Rambam. And what are we going to do? We're going to leave our girls stuck in a marriage that's not working, or make her sleep with a man that she can't stand him, she cannot support? So came Rabbeinu Tam, and he says, okay, we're going to be choshesh to the Shittas HaRosh, yeah? And we're going to permit not to beat him up, but to give him a halochos to Rabbeinu Tam. In other words, we're going to put social pressure, and Rabbeinu Tam says, we're not going to put him a chayrim, but we could give a decree on all the Yidden not to do business, not to do a favor with him, not to do milah to his children, not to bury his dead, till he'll give a get. And the Shulchan Aruch even amplifies that. And anything what the Bezdin sees that they could decree shall be done. And the concept, why is that not considered a get musa? There are two answers, and I'm going to only apply to one of them. When a person is coming to do business, I have no obligation to sell him. I have no obligation to buy from him. If I want to, I could do it. So he cannot demand that we sell to him or we buy to him. So Bezdin can give a decree, nobody should buy or sell with him, because we don't owe him that. Mashiach came to take out $100,000 his pocket and say, if you don't give a get, that will take away from you $100,000. That will be a get musa according to some opinions, not to all. So, taking away something that he cannot demand, or similar, there's no obligation to give him an aliyah. If we say don't give him an aliyah in shul, he cannot claim you have to give me an aliyah. We don't want to.
Is this widely accepted, or is this as we're being told at Das Yachid? There are halachos to Rabbeinu Tam. Does anyone not hold of them?
It's a sif from Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kuf Nun Dalet Sif Chaf Aleph. B'chol makom she'en koifim b'shoitim ein menalin oiseh. B'chol makom yochaylim ligzar akol Yisrael shelo lasu l'shum tova alis litni imoy shara dura b'shen Rabbeinu Tam. Olam haba v'lekovrei ad shegarish miyam and zeiv. B'chol chumra sheyitze Bezdin yochal lachmer v'chai gavni. B'vad shelo yanu do oiseh. Just a straight Ramah without any arguments.
If you have seen a few of my previous videos, you know that we have already established that the halochos de Rabbeinu Tam, falsely interpreted by the gutter rabbis and street thugs to mean public shaming and protests, do not apply in the cases of Moas Alai. Now, Rabbi Gestetner goes on to explain to us that even if it is the ideal situation of Manias Toiva, which means the withholding of certain favors, and a case where the husband can move to another town to avoid the minias toiva, and where we do not even tell the husband that the withholding of those favors is due to the fact of his get refusal, what Feigelstock fails to mention is that these methods cannot be implemented in a case where the husband is willing to give a get. A case where the husband would be willing to give a get is in the event his wife agrees to fulfill certain legitimate requests that he makes of her. So, for example, if the husband says that he's willing to give the get if she assures him that she won't marry a certain individual, or if he requests a reasonable sum of money, then in such cases we cannot implement the Menias Toiva rule. I will say that again. According to the Poskim, including the Marash Dam, the Rosh, the Knesset HaGdoila, the Dvar Emes Oneg Yom Tov, and Yitzchok and Marsham, even in cases where we are permitted to strike the husband with a baton, which is known as Kofan Legarish Min Hadin, that even in the most severe cases of acceptable coercion, we still cannot apply any of the halochos de Rabbeinu Tam, namely the Menias Toiva, from the moment that the husband states that he's willing to give a get after his requests have been fully taken into account. Furthermore, in cases of Moas Salai, which is where the husband never has to give a get, if he was nevertheless willing to give a get, but only under certain conditions, we cannot call him a get refuser, nor can we apply any halochos. This is a glaring omission by Feigelstock, whom I refer to as laughing stock, because he makes a mockery out of the Torah. This is just another example of how the Al Capone rabbis disregard the poskim that I have mentioned and approve of public humiliation in order to extort gittin in Moasalai cases when not even the simple rules of Manias Toiv apply to them, rendering their extorted gittin as unkosher. And we now move on to rationale number 5. This is where Rabbi Gestetner explains that even in situations where all the conditions that allow Manias Toiv are in place, as I just described, namely that he can go somewhere else to avoid being bothered, and we are not telling him that the avoidance of doing favors is because of the get, and that he's absolutely refusing to ever give a get under any circumstances, it is fundamental to understand that we only employ Manias Toiva in a case where the husband is chayev legarish, which means obligated by halacha to divorce. So even if the man is refusing to issue a get, still we cannot employ the Manias Toiva regimen in cases that do not fall under the category of chayev legarish. To put it simply, the Ramon never intended for these halochos to be applied where the man is patur legarish or not obligated to divorce, such as in the case of Moas Salai. The Ramah is basing this on the words of the Machaber, who writes in Even Ezer 154:21, Elu she'oimru lohoitzi, which means that the Manias Toiva only applies to those cases that the husband is in the category of chayev legarish min adin, or where he's obligated to divorce according to halacha. This explanation of the Ramah is not Rabbi Gestetner's invention, but rather it was clearly written down by the Seder Eliyahu Rabba Vezuta and the Beis Ephraim. Therefore, when Laughingstock mentions the Ramah, he's not only manipulating the Ramah to be about a case of Moasalai, where in reality there is no din of chayev legarish, but also because in most of our contemporary cases we are dealing with a moredis, a rebellious woman about which all the poskim agree that the husband is patur legarish la'olam. He never has to issue a get till the end of time. In addition to this, the Divrei Nehemiah was having concerns about a man who had given a forced get due to the halochos being applied to the man's father, and whether or not that get was kosher. So it is patently obvious that the Divrei Nehemiah would have considered it to be a forced get had any pressure been brought to bear against the husband directly. And to add insult to injury, for Laughingstock, the Divrei Nehemiah was a student of the Baal HaTanya, the first Rebbe of Chabad. So how ironic is it that Laughingstock would disregard his own traditions and rule according to the dictates of feminism? And by the way, the Tzemach Tzedek held the Divrei Nehemiah in such high regard that he said that halacha is always like him. You can see paragraph 12 of Rabbi Gestetner's letter linked below for all cited sources. Now, it has come to my attention that after the second Collive video aired, the one we're analyzing today, Feigelstock tried to fix his misinterpretations of the opinion of the Tzemach Tzedek regarding the halochos, but it turns out that he bungled it even more. A thorough refutation response will be forthcoming from Rabbi Gestetner to point out Laughingstock's deliberate falsification of what the Tzemach Tzedek really stated. In due time, I will be presenting to you Rabbi Gestetner's refutation of Laughingstock's Yarchei Kala statements. Now, I just referenced Rabbi Gestetner's pointing out how Laughingstock disregards the teachings of the Tzemach Tzedek, his own Rebbe from Chabad. I would like to inject here my own observations about this subject. You see, an explanation is needed as to why certain rabbis in the Chabad community have been so egregious in their botching of the laws of gittin. People such as Yosef Schusterman, Shalom Dov Ber Shuchat, Y.Y. Jacobson, Saul Emmanuel, Beryl Bell, David Raphael Banon, and Yaakov Barber have all been trampling over the teachings of their very own Rebbes, including the Admor HaZoken, the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Divrei Nehemiah, to their utter shame and disgrace. And even if it were true that the Seder Eliyahu Rabbah Vizuta permitted their halochos, we don't go around choosing a solitary posek to follow when the Roiv Minyan Ubinyan, which means the quality and majority of the poskim, rule otherwise. And as I've said before, they rule that we do not apply their halochos nowadays, even in cases of chayev legarish, so certainly not in cases of poter legarish. But the reality is that those who run around quoting the Seder Eliyahu Rabbah are committing another forgery. You see, the Seder Eliyahu Rabbah was emphatic that when he allowed halochos, he was referring to a very unique and strange set of circumstances that only happened once in a blue moon. First, it involved a bride who ran away from her groom from right under the canopy, a runaway bride, where he never even got close to her, and she remained a spinster in her father's house for 20 years. Secondly, the husband remarried. And third, this was in a community which did everything according to the Rambam. But the Seder Eliyahu Rabbah stressed emphatically that without the triumvirate of elements coming together in this particular Moas Alai case, he would have never had allowed a halochos, and the Tzemach Tzedek agreed with this. You can see all of the details in paragraph 14 of Rabbi Gestetner's letter linked below. And now we come to rationale number 6. Rabbi Gestetner takes things a step further and says that the Mahari ben Lev issued a ruling to the effect that none of the halochos d'Rabbeinu Tam can be applied today under any circumstances. Amazingly enough, this even includes chayev legarish situations. The rationale for this rule was because of the fact that in these later generations, it has been demonstrated that many people could not tolerate even these lighter sanctions, which were still comparable enough to nidui or excommunication. Therefore, they fell under the classification of straight-up coercion, so it was all banned. You see, the sages of old actually cared about the terrible sin of Eishes Ish that could come about through the issuance of a coerced get, unlike the fraudulent rabbis of today. This ruling is also cited in the Ramah, Pischei Tshuva, Shach, Marchash, Beis David, and Achlas Shimon. But wait, there is more. The following poskim also state that we no longer implement the halochos d'Rabbeinu Tam. Maria Sad, Orion Tlisoy, Avnei Nezer, Tshuvas Balatanya, Knesses Agdoila, Pischei Tshuva, Tzemach Tzedek, and the Chazon Ish. For all of the exact citations, please see paragraph 13 of Rabbi Gestetner's letter linked below. So it comes out that if all of these poskim ruled that we cannot apply the halochos d'Rabbeinu Tam even in cases of chayev legarish, then surely in our contemporary divorce cases, most of which fall under this designation of moredes de moes alai, which means a woman who rebels against her husband, saying that he's repulsive to her, then certainly he's poter legarish, meaning he's not obligated to give her a get. To explain what this means, many of these women initiated divorce proceedings by withholding intimate relations from their husbands, which is obviously considered rebellious behavior. Many others commit the grave sin of litigation in the civil courts, which is another clear form of rebellion. And since having this characterization of meredas applies to the wife, releases her husband from any obligation to give her a get, then certainly we do not apply the halochos Rabbeinu Tam to him. And now we come to rationale number 7. Rabbi Gestetner informs us that even though it is true that the Lavush allows halochos on Moas Alai cases, we do not rule like the Lavush, since he is opposed by 266 other poskim, including the Balatanya and the Tzemach Tzedek. That is to say, no one else agrees with him. It is important for me to stress that even the Lavush, who is the only one who allows the halochos in Moas Alai, that in doing so he specifically quotes the reasoning of the Marik, that halochos were allowed only because the husband has the option to move to another town where the halochos would be ineffective. But nowadays, when moving even very far away cannot create a respite for a man due to the internet and social media, then even the Lavush would admit that it is not allowed. So to repeat, there is not even one single posek who would allow what these rabbinic circus clowns are talking about every day here in the year 2022. It is just another instance of Feigelstock and the other Chabad rabbis that when they find a false heter to coerce a man to give a get, they are only making a mockery of the words of the ruling of their very own rebbes. And finally, we arrive at rationale number 8 for why we do not employ halochos of Rabbeinu Tam in a case of Moas Alai. It is important to remember that in the past 700 years, hundreds of tshuvas were written discussing the case of Moas Alai and what to do about a get in those cases. There are more than 200 poskim who concluded that a get cannot be forced in such cases, and they were all left without a solution as for what to do. It is a fact that not even one of these poskim ever came up with the laughingstock suggestion of using the halochos Rabbeinu Tam. This is all a reflection of the words of the Mari Ben Lev, who, as I've pointed out, stated that the halochos were prohibited since their effects were as detrimental as nidui, which means excommunication. The only time they were ever permitted was with chalitza, a case of the brother-in-law of a widow, which is obviously a much lighter scenario than Moas Alai, since in chalitza there was never any conjugal connection. So it is amazing how Laughingstock has the audacity to state that coercion and bullying are clearly allowed in the case of Moas Alai with no one disagreeing, when I have just demonstrated that the opposite is true. Over 200 poskim disagree with him, and among them are even his own very own Chabad Rebbes. In addition, Rabbi Gestetner informs us that when such a commonplace scenario as Moas Alai appears in the poskim over a 1,000-year period with no one hearing of any solution such as halochos, that it is a strong indication of a precedent of action, or in this case of inaction. And it should be remembered that even if the halochos were to be followed to the letter of the law, they were nonetheless all forbidden in our days. So it goes without saying that all of the nonsense being perpetrated today, such as internet shaming and public rallies, are strictly forbidden. So it is beyond disgusting how the Israeli rabbinate and their acolytes, the heretic rabbis from American Besdins, have been sanctioning the draconian measures of shaming, bullying, and even jailing of husbands in cases of Moas Alai, all the while claiming that these measures are synonymous with our halochos de Rabbeinu Tam. This is none other than making a mockery of the Torah, since as we have seen, it is prohibited by all authentic poskim. Rabbi Gestetner also points out that the perfidy of the other heretic in the Collive video, Avi Kahan, who tries to cloak himself in the respectability of a machmir, a stringent one, who follows the Mesorah or traditional path in halachic divorce. Nothing could be further from the truth, unless Kahan's traditions begin in the era of the corrupt Israeli Rabbanut, while flippantly casting away all of the poskim from previous generations. Rabbi Gestetner lampoons Kahan's false piety, who seemingly takes pride in not being one of those rabbis who takes part in issuing fake annulments to Moredesses. Rabbi Gestetner compares Kahan to a man who states that he would never shoplift in a store, but then that very same man later turns around and pays for his merchandise with a counterfeit check. Both of those thieves are crooks. The only difference between them is that one crook is a low-life degenerate, and the other is an upscale, respectable crook. In the same vein, there is no difference at all between a rebellious woman who receives an annulment and one who receives a coerced get. Both are committing adultery and producing mamzerim, unclean, bastard-like children, when they remarry. So in summation, Feigelstock and his cronies in the Israeli rabbinate want us to believe that halochos are allowed without any disagreeing, when in reality the opposite is true, that halochos are forbidden today with not even one posek who disagrees. Rabbi Gestetner has refuted these false statements with his 8 rationales, with every single one of them being enough to crown the laughing Feigelstock and his ilk with the mantle of Machshalas Arabim, one who causes the public to stumble in the serious sins of Eishes Ish and Malbim Pnei Chaver Barabim. So how much more so is this true with all of the 8 rationales taken together? When one ponders the countless sins being produced by foolish laughingstock, his partner Kahan, and all of the others who promote these reform-style gittin, one can only wonder how they will ever justify their actions in the heavenly court. For there are more sins being produced by these people than all of the stars in the galaxies. Regarding this, the verse states, Me'uvis lo yochol liskan. What is twisted cannot be repaired. May heaven protect us all from this fate. In summation, it is clear that the modus operandi of these heretic rabbis is to either distort the words of a posek to make it fit their agenda, or otherwise they will search for the outlier posek, the one whom the majority disagrees with, such as the Rambam in the cases of Moasalai, and just quote his opinion to the masses, trying to make us believe that this is how we rule. It is precisely for this reason that Rabbi Gestetner and I have made it our mission to expose their lies, heresy, and manipulations, and we will continue to do so in order to set the record straight and to preserve the integrity of our Torah and sages. I will conclude this video with an open invitation and challenge to any and all who think they can disprove anything I have said here in regards to the authentic Torah halachas of divorce. And that invitation is also directed to any of the participants in the Collive videos and anyone else who thinks they can disprove anything that was said in this video. Please leave your comments below, as I will be patiently looking forward to see what you all have to say. Till then, thank you for watching and see you all in the next video.